What would make a successful architect walk away from steady income, city comfort, and years of professional status, just to wake up before sunrise and work the land? Pete Larson's story isn't a simple follow your dreams tale. It's about risk, doubt, and rebuilding something most people would have let disappear. Behind the calm, practical tone of Just a Few Acres Farm lies a journey filled with uncertainty, sacrifice, and quiet determination. This isn't just about farming. It's about redefining success, restoring a forgotten legacy, and choosing purpose over prestige, even when the outcome is far from guaranteed. For most viewers, it's hard to imagine Pete Larson as anything other than a farmer. But long before the tractors, livestock, and early mornings, he was building a completely different life. After growing up around the family farm near Ithaca, New York, Pete didn't plan to stay. In fact, like many kids raised in rural America, he couldn't wait to leave. The farm felt ordinary, predictable, small. So he pursued architecture, earning his degree and eventually becoming a partner in a successful firm. From the outside, it looked like he had made it. City life brought stability, steady income, and professional respect. He was designing buildings, managing projects, and climbing a ladder most people spend decades trying to reach. Farming, at that point, seemed like a closed chapter, something tied to childhood memories rather than adult ambition. But success has a strange way of raising uncomfortable questions. The work was solid, the paycheck reliable, yet something felt disconnected. The land his family had owned since the early 1800s was still there, quietly waiting. And while Pete had built a modern career, the pull of that history never fully disappeared. What started as a practical, conventional path was about to collide with something far more personal, and that tension would change everything. The turning point didn't arrive with fireworks or a dramatic announcement. It started with a house, an old, worn-down farmhouse that had been sitting in Pete's family for generations. When Pete and his wife, Hillary, bought it in the mid-1990s, it was barely livable. We're talking outdated wiring, no real plumbing to speak of, and decades of neglect layered into every wall. Most people would have torn it down or hired a full renovation crew. They didn't. Instead, they rebuilt it themselves. What looked like a simple restoration project quietly became something much bigger. Nights and weekends were spent repairing floors, running electrical lines, and slowly bringing life back into a structure that held over a century of family history. It wasn't glamorous. It was exhausting, slow, and often frustrating. But with every board replaced and every system repaired, Pete wasn't just restoring a house. He was rebuilding a connection, and that's where things shifted. The more time he spent on the property, the harder it became to ignore the possibility that the farm wasn't just a relic of the past. It was potential. Land that had fed generations could do it again. What began as a practical home renovation started evolving into a serious question. What if this wasn't just where they lived, but what they built their future on? That quiet thought would soon demand a real decision. The real gamble came when Pete did something most professionals only fantasize about. He stepped away. Not permanently at first. He took what was supposed to be a temporary leave from his architecture firm. Just 6 months to test an idea that had been growing louder in his mind. It sounded reasonable, safe. A short break to see if farming could even work. But once he fully immersed himself in daily farm life, everything shifted. He started small, raising broiler chickens, learning the rhythms of processing, selling directly to customers, figuring things out the hard way. There was no massive safety net, no guaranteed income. Every decision mattered. Feed costs, weather shifts, equipment repairs. One bad stretch could wipe out months of effort. Farming wasn't romantic, it was relentless. And yet, something clicked. The physical work, the direct results, the connection to customers. It felt tangible in a way drafting blueprints never had. The 6-month experiment stopped feeling temporary. Going back to architecture began to feel like stepping away from something more meaningful. Eventually, Pete made the decision that shocked many around him. He sold his stake in the firm and committed to farming full-time. It wasn't reckless, it was calculated, but still bold. He walked away from security for uncertainty, and once that bridge was crossed, there was no easy path back. Going full-time wasn't the finish line, it was the real beginning. Once Pete committed to farming as his primary livelihood, the pressure intensified. This wasn't a hobby anymore, The farm had to produce steady income or it wouldn't survive. That meant building something diversified and resilient, not relying on a single product or seasonal gamble. They expanded carefully. Broiler chickens became a core focus, but they didn't stop there. Turkeys, laying hens for eggs, pigs, and even Dexter cattle entered the rotation over time. Each addition wasn't random, it was strategic. Different animals meant different revenue streams, spreading risk across the year. If one area dipped, another could carry the load. Selling directly to customers became a major pillar of the operation. Farmers markets and a community-supported agriculture model created face-to-face relationships with buyers. There were no middlemen to cushion mistakes. If quality slipped, customers noticed. If supply fell short, income tightened. It was personal, immediate, and sometimes uncomfortable. But that pressure sharpened the operation. Pete documented the learning curve openly. Equipment breakdowns, pricing adjustments, seasonal miscalculations. Nothing about scaling up was smooth. Every expansion required reinvestment, careful budgeting, and long hours that didn't fit neatly into a 9-to-5 schedule. The farm slowly transitioned from experiment to enterprise. Yet, just as stability began forming, an unexpected opportunity appeared. One that would take the farm far beyond local markets. The next shift didn't happen in a barn or pasture. It happened online. In 2019, Pete picked up a camera and started sharing what he was already doing every day. There was no flashy intro, no overproduced editing, no dramatic music. Just honest footage of farm work, fixing equipment, raising chickens, rotating livestock, solving problems in real time. It wasn't designed to go viral. It was meant to document. But that authenticity hit harder than anyone expected. Viewers weren't just watching farming tutorials. They were seeing transparency. Pete didn't hide mistakes. If a piece of equipment failed, he explained why. If a batch of birds didn't go as planned, he walked through the lesson. That kind of openness is rare online, and it built trust fast. The channel, Just a Few Acres Farm, started growing steadily. Then it accelerated. Tens of thousands turned into hundreds of thousands. People from cities, suburbs, even other countries tuned in. Not because they planned to farm, but because they connected with the grounded, practical mindset behind it. And here's what makes it powerful. YouTube didn't replace the farm. It supported it. The camera became another tool, one that expanded the farm's reach without changing its core values. But growth online brings its own pressures. And that next chapter would test things in ways the early days never did. In the end, Pete Larson's story isn't really about farming. It's about choice. He had the kind of career most people are told to chase: stable, respected, financially secure. Walking away from that wasn't impulsive. It was uncomfortable, risky, and very real. The farmhouse restoration, the 6-month leave that turned permanent, the slow build of livestock and local markets, none of it was guaranteed to work. It only looks obvious now because we're seeing it after the fact. What makes this journey powerful isn't overnight success or viral growth. It's consistency. Pete didn't reinvent himself for attention. He returned to something that had always been there, waiting quietly in the background: the land, the legacy, the opportunity to build something tangible. And even with a thriving YouTube channel and a loyal audience, the heart of it hasn't changed. The farm still demands early mornings. It still carries risk. It still requires resilience. Maybe that's the real takeaway. Success doesn't always mean climbing higher. Sometimes it means going back, and building stronger than before. So the question isn't why Pete left architecture. It's this: how many people are brave enough to listen when something pulls them home?